The assignment was simple. Sit in the corner, keep the contracts organized, and don't say a word unless someone asked. Darcy Aldwell had followed that rule for 6 years, until the night she didn't. She was 31 years old, the senior contracts analyst for Whitmore, Braun and Associates, one of the most respected corporate law firms in Chicago. She had a law degree from DePaul, a certified translation credential in 3 languages, and 4 years of documented proof that she personally caught the errors that kept multi-million-dollar deals from collapsing at the last minute. She had never once been invited to sit at the main table. Tonight she stood near the mahogany credenza at the back of the private dining room at the Langham Hotel on East Wacker Drive, a leather folio pressed against her chest, her reading glasses tucked into the breast pocket of her black blazer. Darcy was a full-figured woman, broad-shouldered and soft in the middle, with heavy hips and thick arms that her custom-tailored suit did what it could to accommodate without apologizing for. She had stopped apologizing for her body around the same time she'd stopped expecting her partners to learn her name. You could spend your whole life making yourself smaller so other people stayed comfortable, or you could take up your space and dare the room to say something. The room never said anything. It never even looked at her long enough to form an opinion. She was the detail woman, the quiet one with the contracts. She was invisible. And tonight, invisibility was exactly the asset she needed. The dinner was a merger negotiation. Papademos Maritime Group, Greek, old money, global shipping routes controlling a quarter of the Pacific freight corridor, was in preliminary talks to acquire Crestview Technologies, a mid-sized Chicago firm with AI-driven logistics software that every major shipper on Earth desperately wanted. The deal was worth $900 million. Darcy had spent the last 4 months reviewing every document associated with it. The dinner was supposed to be informal, relationship building, champagne and handshakes. The actual work was done by people like Darcy, standing quietly near the wall. There were 6 men at the table, 3 from Crestview, including Sherman Braun, the managing partner, silver-haired and bright-eyed, with the particular excitement of a man who believed he was about to become significantly richer, and 3 from the Greek side. The man at the head of the table was Nikos Papademos. She had known from the file photo that he was striking. In person, he was something else entirely, mid-40s, dark-haired with threads of silver at his temples, built broad and solid under his charcoal suit, the way a man looks when he grew up doing physical work before he inherited an empire. His hands were large and completely unhurried. His eyes were the color of the Aegean in winter, deep blue-green, still and fathomless. He carried his authority the way certain structures carry weight, invisibly, from the foundation up. He did not need to raise his voice to fill a room. He simply sat at the head of it, and the room rearranged itself accordingly. He had not looked at Darcy once, which was exactly what she needed, because Nikos Papademos had been speaking quietly to his deputy, a lean, sharp-faced man named Petros, in a language he clearly believed no one else in the room could follow. It wasn't standard modern Greek, not the clean Athenian dialect that a well-traveled business person might recognize. It was Cretan, specifically a regional village dialect from the interior of the island, thick with vowel shifts and idiomatic phrases that even fluent Greek speakers sometimes struggled to pass. Darcy's Yaya, her maternal grandmother, had been born in a village 20 kilometers outside Heraklion. She had died at 92, having never learned to love the English word for love. She said it in Greek, always. She scolded in Greek and prayed in Greek and told stories in Greek, and for the first 18 years of Darcy's life, she had sat in that woman's kitchen in Pilsen and absorbed every cadence, every idiom, every lyrical, weathered syllable of that exact dialect. She was certified as a legal translator in Greek. She had been for 4 years. She understood every word Nikos Papademos was saying, and what he was saying was very, very interesting. He was not discussing the wine. He was telling Petros, his voice dropped to a frequency that blended into the ambient sound of the room, that the moment the source code access transferred in Phase 1 of the deal, they would exercise the walkaway clause embedded in Schedule D and dissolve the acquisition before Phase 2 funding was released. They intended to take the software architecture and leave Crestview with nothing. Darcy kept her face completely blank. Her heart rate had climbed to something alarming. Her pen still hovered over her legal pad as though she'd been about to note something routine. "Do not react," she told herself. "You are the furniture. You are the quiet woman with the contracts who does not understand Greek." She stared at the low arrangement of white orchids in the center table and breathed. Then her phone vibrated in her blazer pocket. 3 short pulses, the firm's internal override signal reserved for active deal emergencies. She pulled it free and looked at the screen. Franco at Lakeside Financial. The message read, "Urgent. Wire routing numbers on Schedule B don't match. Signing window at risk." Darcy closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She stepped further back toward the credenza, angled her body away from the table, and answered. "Aldwell," she whispered. The voice belonged to Franco, and Franco was panicking. "The routing numbers on the escrow draw schedule," he said, "didn't match the master agreement. He'd flagged this to partner Braun's office 3 days ago and received no response. If the numbers couldn't be reconciled by morning, the deal died in escrow." His voice had that quality of a man who needed someone else to absorb his crisis for him. Darcy knew exactly what had happened. A junior associate had transposed 2 digits in the Schedule B addendum during the last revision. She had caught it herself 2 weeks ago in a memo that had apparently been misdirected and never addressed. "Pull up the original master agreement," she whispered. "Page 44, subsection C. The controlling numbers are there. The addendum is the error." Franco didn't have clearance for the master agreement at this hour. Franco had been calling all night. Nobody responded. Nobody on her team answered. And then, because Franco had apparently decided that volume was a viable strategy, he told her maybe she should pass the issue along to someone more senior, someone with actual authority to make the call. The filter snapped. 6 years of standing at the back of rooms, 6 years of handing documents to partners who addressed them to the air above her head, 6 years of catching the errors that saved the deals while other people accepted the credit. And now Franco, who had probably never read a master agreement in his professional life, suggesting she escalate past herself. Darcy sucked in 1 breath and let it out. And then, because her Yair's voice was always loudest when she was furious, she responded to Franco in rapid, precise, absolutely blistering Cretan Greek. She told him where the correct numbers were, in which document, on which page, in which subsection. She told him that if he couldn't locate a human being with database access in the next 45 minutes, he needed to call her directly, because she was the only person currently engaged with this transaction who actually understood its architecture. She told him what senior enough looked like. Her voice was low, controlled, and carried the exact lethal precision of a woman who had run out of patience for men who confused volume with authority. She ended the call. The dining room had gone completely quiet. Darcy turned around slowly. Nikos Papadimos was watching her, not the way powerful men usually looked at her. The quick, calibrating once over, followed by the decision to look past her. He was watching her the way a person looks at something they weren't expecting, something that has shifted the calculation they were running. His full attention perfectly still, like a scope finding a target. Petros had gone rigid beside him. Sherman Braun looked confused. The other Crestview men were staring at the tablecloth. "I apologize for the interruption," Darcy said. Her voice was steady. 6 years of practice. A filing issue. It's resolved." Nikos said nothing. He picked up his wine glass and took 1 slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving her face. The dinner ended 40 minutes later. Darcy was moving down the corridor toward the elevator bank, her folio under her arm, already composing the correction email in her head, when footsteps fell into place behind her. "You speak Cretan," said a voice to her left. She turned. Petros stood 2 feet away. His expression was professionally neutral in the specific way of a man whose neutrality is itself a warning. "I do," Darcy said. "Mr. Papademos would like a word." The elevator doors opened in front of her. She looked at them, the clean, simple exit, the lobby, a cab, her apartment, and then she looked away from them. Nikos was waiting at the end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, jacket buttoned, completely at ease. He had the composure of a man who had already decided how this conversation would end. Darcy walked toward him. She kept her pace even and her hands still. "Miss Aldwell," he said when she was close enough. His English was accented and precise. "You spent the evening pretending you didn't understand me." "Yes." "Why tell me now?" "I didn't tell you anything," Darcy said. "You figured it out." Something moved through his face, not quite a smile, but the thing that comes just before one. "Fair, where did you learn it?" "Not from a classroom." "My grandmother. She was from a village outside Heraklion. I grew up in her kitchen. She didn't believe in English for anything that mattered." He was quiet a moment. He looked at her the way someone examines a document that says something they didn't expect, careful, recalibrating. "Then you understood what I said to Petros?" "Everything." He nodded once. "Then you know what I said would destroy the deal." "What you said would destroy Crestview," Darcy corrected, "which is not quite the same thing. And you have a problem too." His attention sharpened by a degree. "Come with me." The car was a black Mercedes, idling at the hotel's side entrance. Petros got into the front without instruction. Nikos held the rear door and waited, and Darcy made the same calculation she'd made in the corridor, the easy exit or the answer, and got in. The back seat was black leather and cool air, and the contained, expensive silence of a vehicle built to isolate its passengers from the ordinary sounds of the city. Nikos settled beside her. He wasn't close enough to crowd her, but in the contained space she was acutely aware of the size of him, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he occupied his half of the seat without any particular effort. He smelled of cedar and cold air, and something slightly darker underneath. Chicago moved past the tinted windows. Neither of them spoke for a minute. "You said I have a problem," Nikos said. "Schedule C, subsection 14. Darcy opened her folio in her lap. She knew these pages without looking, but there was something clarifying about holding them. The IP transfer protocol assigns personal liability for any product defect or regulatory violation discovered post-transfer to the acquiring party. To you personally, named signatory, not to Papademos Maritime as an entity, to you. In the passing light, she saw his jaw tighten. Crestview added this language in the 3rd revision of the document, she continued. Their AI system has a known regulatory exposure in the EU market that was never disclosed to your team. If you execute the walkaway after Phase 1 like you're planning, you don't just exit the deal. You walk away with the liability already attached to your signature because the IP transfer occurs at signing. The walkaway clause doesn't sever the liability. You'll stop paying for something that is now, legally, entirely your problem. The silence in the car was absolute. My lawyers reviewed this document, Nikos said, very quiet. Your lawyers reviewed the 2nd revision. The language changed in the 3rd. The version they reviewed is obsolete. From the front seat, Petros said something in Greek that was not printable. Nikos picked up the folio and read the clause. Read it again. Set it down. He looked at her with an expression that she couldn't place at first. And then she recognized it, because she'd seen it on her own face in a mirror the first time she'd understood what the clause meant. The particular stillness of someone who has just grasped exactly how close they came to a catastrophe they couldn't have recovered from. You came to this dinner representing the other side, he said slowly, and you just handed me the evidence that my own lawyers missed. I came to make sure the contracts were correct, Darcy said. They're not correct. I can't fix that on a technicality about which chair I was sitting in. He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. The deal needs to be restructured from the ground up. The signing window is in 36 hours. I know. I've already drafted the corrective language in my head. I need a secure word processor and about 4 hours. Nikos Papadimos stared at her. In the shifting city light, his face was all plains and shadow, and she watched something complicated work its way through it and settle into something that looked improbably like relief. The penthouse was high and spare and faced the lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows, dark water, the Chicago skyline strung with light. Darcy registered it the way she registered everything useful, catalogued, filed, moved past. She sat at the dining table he indicated, opened her laptop, and pulled up the agreement files. "Something to drink," he said. "Coffee," she said, "and I need your legal team's contact information to flag the document revision discrepancy in the master repository." A short sound came from the kitchen doorway. She looked up. He was standing there, jacket off, collar open, one hand braced on the doorframe, looking at her the way someone looks when something has surprised them and they haven't quite decided what to do about it yet. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I was afraid of you in the corridor," Darcy said honestly, looking back at her screen. "I'm less afraid when I'm busy. Most people remain afraid of me even when they're busy. I imagine, but right now you need me more than you need me afraid." He brought coffee. He sat across the table, not at the head of it, across from her, and she felt him watching as she began to draft. He didn't interrupt. He didn't hover. He simply watched, and after several minutes, she found she had stopped noticing him the way you notice a threat, and started noticing him the way you notice a presence. The quality of his silence, the way he leaned forward slightly, with his hands loosely linked, attending to her work with the same intensity she gave it. Around midnight, she looked up and caught him looking at her. Not at the screen. At her. He didn't look away when she caught him. He simply continued to look, with that same unhurried, fathomless attention, taking in the width of her shoulders, the soft fullness of her, the way she sat in the chair as if it belonged to her. Because it did. He did not recalibrate downward. He did not perform indifference. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they have decided is worth looking at properly, and he let her see him doing it. Darcy looked back at her screen. "There's a second issue," she said. "Of course there is. The escrow routing error. The wire window closes at 9 a.m. If I don't send the correction tonight, none of what I'm drafting matters because the funding mechanism won't open." Nikos pressed 2 fingers to his temple. "You are sitting in my penthouse having just prevented me from losing my personal assets, and you are concerned about a transposed digit in an escrow schedule." "I'm concerned about the digit, the addendum, the EU regulatory exposure, and the liability clause," Darcy said. "I'm a thorough worrier." He laughed, a real one, sudden and deep, the kind that caught him off guard, his shoulders shaking with it, his eyes briefly lit from somewhere inside. It changed his face completely, made him look like someone who had forgotten, briefly, to be the most powerful person in the room. "Have Petros call the escrow office," she said when he'd recovered. "He'll need the master agreement number, page 1, top right, and the authorization code, which is—" "Darcy." She stopped. He was looking at her again, patient, still, that deep-water attention that moved at its own pace and couldn't be hurried by anything happening at the surface. "Let me worry about Petros," he said. "You finished the addendum." She finished it in 2 hours and 11 minutes. Clean, legally watertight language that eliminated the personal liability trap in Schedule C, replaced the bad walkaway clause with terms that actually reflected a fair deal, and incorporated a disclosure requirement for the EU regulatory issue that protected both parties at closing. 40 pages. She knew it by the time she sent it to both legal teams. It was 2:47 in the morning. Petros had already handled the escrow call. The wire window was preserved. Nikos read through the corrective addendum on his tablet while Darcy finished her second cup of coffee. She watched him read, watched the precise sequential way he moved through a document, not skimming, actually reading, and thought that whatever she'd expected from a man who ran an empire, it wasn't this. The actual attention, the willingness to sit with the detail. "You wrote this in under 3 hours," he said, setting the tablet down. "I had most of it worked out in the car." He looked at her steadily. "I want to offer you the position of head of contractual risk at Papademos Maritime," he said. "Based in Chicago, the salary," he named a number. Darcy kept her expression still. "That's considerably more than my current salary," she said. "Yes, it should be." She studied him. "You'd restructure a $900 million deal and offer a position to a contracts analyst you met tonight." "I'd restructure the deal," he said, "because the alternative was signing a document that would have ended me." And the analyst who caught it was standing at the back of the room holding a folio. The corner of his mouth moved. "I don't make the same mistake twice." The morning was harder. Sherman Braun called at 7 a.m. The conversation was long and careful, and at several points involved him saying things like the firm's exposure and appropriate channels in ways that really meant, "You went around us, and we don't know what to do with that." He did not say thank you. He did come close to saying it once, and then didn't. At 8:15, one of the Crestview partners, a man named Clifford, who had never once spoken directly to Darcy in 4 months of working this deal, appeared at the entrance of the small room she'd been given to prepare in, and told her, with the particular tight politeness of someone delivering a threat dressed as concern, that the firm was evaluating whether her independent conduct the previous evening had created a conflict of interest, requiring her recusal from the signing. Darcy set down her pen. She looked at Clifford for a moment. He was standing in the doorway with his jacket buttoned and his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who expected her to fold. "The independent conduct you're referencing," she said, "was the discovery of an undisclosed regulatory liability in your client's software asset, which your team deliberately buried in a late-stage document revision and which would have defrauded the acquiring party. If you'd like to discuss conflict of interest, I'd suggest starting there." She picked her pen back up. "I'll see you at the signing." Clifford left. The signing happened that afternoon in the conference room she had never sat in before. She sat at the table this time, a chair down from Sherman Braun, who had gone quiet in the way of men who have been reminded of something they would prefer to forget. Nikos Papademos sat across from her. When the documents were being passed around for signature, she felt his eyes on her before she looked up. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at her with that same steady, deep-water attention, and there was something in it now, past the professional gravity, that was warm, the way sunlight looks at the bottom of a clear lake, present but unhurried, certain of itself. She looked down at the document in front of her, turned to the corrected Schedule C, ran her eyes over the language one final time. And then she saw it. A single clause in the indemnification section, 4 lines, easily overlooked, buried between 2 longer provisions, that had been quietly reinserted after her corrective addendum. It was subtle. It was the kind of change that looks like a clerical formatting correction and functions as a trap. It shifted the dispute resolution jurisdiction in a way that would make any future litigation functionally inaccessible to the acquiring party. Darcy set down her pen. "We need to stop," she said. The room went still. Sherman Braun turned to look at her. Clifford looked at her. Several lawyers on both sides looked at her, the kind of silence that has a temperature to it. Darcy turned the document around and placed it in the center of the table. She pointed to the clause. She explained, in precise, unhurried language, exactly what it did, and exactly how it had been reinserted between the draft she'd filed at 2:47 in the morning and the version now sitting in front of them. Clifford's face did something involuntary, and unflattering. Nikos Papadimos picked up the document. He read the clause. He looked at Clifford with an expression that would have made most people leave the room voluntarily. Then he set the document down and looked at his own lawyers. "Fix it," he said. "Absolutely." It took 47 minutes. Darcy made the correction herself, in a side room with both legal teams watching, because at that point nobody was pretending she wasn't the person who knew this document best. When the revised version came back to the table, Nikos signed it without taking his eyes off the page. When the room, filled with the careful, contained energy of $900 million of deals successfully closed, he stood up and crossed to her. The room was full of people. He didn't seem to notice them particularly. He handed her a card, plain, just his name and a number, and his hand stilled against hers for a moment, warm and deliberate. "The offer stands," he said quietly, "whenever you're ready." She looked at the card for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I'll call you tonight," she said. Something moved in the dark water of his eyes. Not quite a smile yet, but the thing that comes just before it, and she had the sense it was rare, genuinely rare, the kind of expression that cost something to give. He nodded once and left. Darcy stood in the conference room with the card in her hand, surrounded by partners who were only now beginning to understand the shape of what had happened over the past 18 hours, and she thought about her Yaia's kitchen, the smell of olive oil and dried thyme, the sound of Greek moving through the small house in Pilsen like something alive. The voice that had told her, in that warm rolling dialect that belonged to no classroom, the things worth keeping are the things that see your real name. She looked at the card. For the first time in 6 years, she did not feel like part of the furniture. She felt like the reason the table was standing.